For the next hour, I'm going to share bits and pieces of a multi-year project that came out of the pandemic, essentially a failed project during the pandemic. But it's a multi-river view of where the Munsee people came from on the eastern coast of the United States to where we are now, which is in southwestern Ontario. So there'll be a smattering of Thames River photos, but there'll also be those strong connections to the Munsee culture, language, and our history. It would be remiss of me not to mention those that have supported my own understanding of Munsee culture, Munsee language, Munsee history over the years. So I thought I'd share a smattering of family photos. Within these photos here, you'll see the photos are kind of yellow, which indicate that I'm no longer a younger person. I'm 53, but in these photos include my sister, my mother, my great grandfather Alonzo, who lived on Munsee, my grandmother Doris, my great grandfather Scobia Logan, who was chief of the community for many years, Skip Logan, who's my uncle, and my other uncle, Sonny. So these are all people that have contributed through stories or conversation, but they've shared bits of their lives with me over the years. They have sort of maintained that interest or spurned that interest in me to learn more about my mother's people's history and culture. I'd be remiss not to mention the fact that we are in the month of what people call it Order Shirt Day, but remembering those that did not come back from residential schools. And I wanted to make sure that this was part of the presentation because this is one of the reasons why there is that gap in understanding one's language, culture, and history, because, of course, the schools remove that from communities, and Munsee-Delaware is no exception. But if you take a small community like Munsee-Delaware, where a population would have been about 250 people, there's very few people that would hold on to that knowledge from years and generations, and you send generations to these schools, that there's a break that is only repairable by looking through and doing a lot of research to find those missing pieces in archives and in museums worldwide. So, when it comes to September 30th, definitely make sure that you take that moment to reach out or to understand more about residential school era in this country. The picture here is of Mount Elgin, which was built on the Chippewa of the Thames First Nation. They used to overlook the river. The barn in the very background of this picture is still there as part of the Save the Evidence campaign. As promised, I wanted to make sure that I showed a smattering of photos. So you will see photos of the Thames River, and I must admit that in my long association of being around Munsee, Delaware, and being, taken there as a kid by my mother and my grandmother to visit my great grandfather. So 53 years potentially of connection with the river. I only started to actually look at the river from a different lens by paddling it when I was approaching my late 40s. And it came out of a canceled event for Canadian historians. So there was a big gathering that was supposed to happen during the pandemic in London, Ontario, for the Canadian Historical Association. And a team of us, including my sister Mary Jane, Professor Tom Peace at Huron College, Chief Mark Peters, Mark's son Justin, we had planned an excursion for people who were at that meeting to learn more about the Munsee people, but take them actually out onto the river. But of course, the pandemic canceled that, and it all went online. But we found out that there's no better way to social distance than actually being in a canoe and being on the Thames River. So we continued the journey, and we started at the Forks in London, Ontario. Chief Mark had grandiose plans just to keep on paddling all the way to Lake St. Clair. But as pushing 48, 49 years old, I had to decline that. My back loves a hotel bed now, not the cold ground and a sleeping bag. So we decided we were going to do this in sections as opposed to reliving our youth. What the river taught us, or at least it shared with me, actually going out on the river and not just looking at it over a bridge. But if you paddle the Thames as a Munsee person, you're able to connect with story from the community. You're able to connect with the natural world, the fauna, the Carolinian Forest, the trees, the plants, and develop an understanding also how the Munsee people would have used those trees and plants. It also taught us about place names. So the fact that Munsee people have been in southwestern Ontario since recorded time of 1780, just after the American Revolution, we have names for places here in Ontario that are different than Ojibwe names or Haudenosaunee names or English or French. It taught, the river taught about our cyclical pattern, our seasonal cycles of where we went. So we had our village on the Thames, our villages on the Thames, but we also had camps for maple sugar, for fishing, for hunting, and for farming. We had these different patterns in southwestern Ontario, something that we had back when we lived on the eastern seaboard. It taught me about politics. It taught me about religion. It taught me about breaking down the language and understanding language and those key pieces in there that provide clues as to what the plants will give you. And of course, it offers that sharing, the ability to share with everybody from the community. And that picture is of a split ash basket making event that we had on the community. But again, the ash trees that have been decimated by the emerald ash borer, but those ash trees were very important in terms of the technology in the community and things that we would have done. If you're not familiar with the Thames River, here's sort of a piece that has been taken from the Thames River Conservation Authority. So it gives you an idea of how long this trek that my chief had thought we were going to be able to do basically straight through. And I can tell you now that we've gone from the forks of the Thames and we are just about at Thamesville. And that's been over the span of 4 years now, just taking the river in chunks. And I find that it's much more interesting and exciting if you're able just to enjoy it, as opposed to feeling like you really need to put some distance between you and your starting point. And you get to take in the river, but also think about it from the perspective of the people who've gone on before, your relatives, your ancestors who would have used this river to get between the communities, so to get between Munsee-Delaware and Moraviantown, but even also to get to Amherstburg, to get to Detroit, like the bigger places where you could trade. So these two maps here, one to the left, just shows the audience tonight that the Munsee people were actually, their territory was much more closer to New York City than southwestern Ontario. So that's essentially where the Munsee-Delaware people had their territory at the time of contact. And there's the bigger group known as the Lenape had another group called the Unami. So essentially, the best way to describe it is that there are two different linguistic dialects happening that are understandable, not unlike the Odawa, the Potawatomi, or the Chippewa have dialects within the Ojibwe language. For the most part, the Munsee people have moved to southwestern Ontario and to Wisconsin, whereas the Unami people have moved out to Oklahoma. I should say it's a forced move because of war, of disease, of failed treaties and treaty negotiations with the British and later the United States. However, they're no longer in the homelands. The three dots on the map of southwestern Ontario just show the three communities that are here now that have been existed since 1780. So the Delaware at Six Nations, the Delaware at Smoothtown, then you've got Munsee-Delaware, and then you've got Moraviantown. And I apologize for the amateurish red dots, but it seemed to really sparkle on the map when I created it. So if I was to talk a little bit about the geography with the support of the University of Western Ontario, and I can't call it Western University yet, as a graduate at the University of Western Ontario, we've been able to create a map based on all of the different place names that have been found through archive work, talking with people in communities of different places in southwestern Ontario. And for most of you on this call, you'll probably know that the city of Hamilton, and I'll use it as basically it's the best example of where language can actually tell you way more if you're learning it about the place that you're looking at. So Hamilton, Ontario, besides being full of it's a steel town, it can come off as having different nicknames. The Hammer, it is, or the original Hamilton is actually on the lower part close to Lake Ontario beneath the escarpment. So you've got the upper Hamilton and lower Hamilton going on. The Munsee name for it is Alamawang, and this name was given to it most likely by the Delaware people who lived at Six Nations that lived close by. And if you peel open the dictionary and you look through it and you really decipher what Alamawang means, it means below the hill. So below the hill. And of course, if you're going to describe a city like Hamilton, it's perfect description because at that time in the 1800s, the 1840s, 50s, 60s, Hamilton existed underneath the escarpment. So, making the connection between river travel and place names, and suddenly now the world is starting to open up again, right? Where you're making those connections between the geography and the landforms around you to actually using the Munsee language to help you understand. These pictures, I believe, one to the right is just after the dam at Springbank Park, and the one to the left is you're getting pretty close to Delaware. The picture to the left is much more significant because I didn't realize that there were clams that were in the Thames that are the size of your hand. In terms of freshwater clams growing that big, because I'm used to clams here in Georgian Bay and Lake Simcoe that are a fraction of that size. But what it spurs a thought in terms of did the Munsee people use the clams as a food source, or did they use them for anything else? You have these they're not everywhere in the Thames River, but are they a source of anything? And then it for me as a language person, it also goes, okay, so what is the word for clam in the Munsee language? I need to go and find that. Of course, we weren't an isolated people. The travel between Buffalo and Detroit is well known. I mean, several railways have crossed southwestern Ontario because it's a quick way to go. But from Burlington Bay all the way down to Detroit for the British, when they inherited Upper Canada, or they inherited Quebec, with the province of Quebec at the time, there was lots of travel by Governor Simcoe from what probably was the headquarters at Newark, or Niagara-on-the-Lake, and then going out to Detroit before Detroit was given back to the Americans. And he stopped not once, but he stopped twice at the villages at Munsee on the Thames, and he had his officer Little Hales recorded that they had a wonderful meal of venison and eggs. I guess the venison and eggs went down real well because he stopped on his way back from Detroit on his way back to Burlington. And we believe at that time that he also promised the Munsee people that they could that there was a land promise that they could have 12 miles square around the Thames River, which is really important because it sort of sets up the next couple of maps I'm going to show you. So now we're digging into the geography, but we're actually digging into, okay, well, who came to our community and sort of what sort of conversations have happened there post-American Revolution. There's the big map of the Thames River. I believe this is the, I'm going to forget his name, surveyor in 1793 that came through.
McNiff.
McNiff, thank you. Not, I was going to say Malin Burwell, but it was McNiff. So this map is also quite handy for the river journeys as well, because of course we get to see the different paths that came along the river, as well as areas of importance that McNiff decided to record. So if we do a close-up to the villages on the Thames River, the Munsee villages, you'll see a village of Chippewa people, and there's lots of different stories in terms of the Chippewa that we were the overnight guests that never left, that we were people that they welcomed after the revolution to come and stay with them, because we had to leave the United States as British, as we had supported the British endeavors. From a Munsee perspective, though, what we do see is here that we have a road that leads to the Moravian village that goes right through to Munsee. the three villages. There's also a road that goes south to Lake Erie, and it talks about how it's a 5 hours walk if you wanted to do it. From the perspective of community member, our reserve is only on the north side of the Thames River currently, and it is a patchwork within another reserve, the Chippewa of the Thames. But at one time, we had three villages. We had the upper village, which is right where that road from Moravian Village is coming out. We had the south side, which is in Southwold Township, very close to where the Oneida Nation of the Thames is now. And that's a village that was called Turkey Creek. And then we've got Lower Munsee Town, which is lower down the river there, identified by 6 buildings. So taking a paddle on the Thames, paddling through this area, you get to actually see why we had 3 different villages on the Thames River. We also get to see the expanse of where we actually settled. We weren't in a nice little compartment called a reserve, but we actually had territory on both sides. We'll see if this works. I'm tempting fate, but here's a video of that area shot by, what do you call those? Drones. So we got the Thames River, and you're going south from the Oneida Bridge, the bridge that connects Chippewa, the Thames, and Oneida. And this is some footage of the Thames River taken about 3 years ago. And you'll see that it's very flat on both sides. And you'll also notice that there's some crops there, really good crops. Well, the rationale for showing that video, it shows that the Munsee people settled where they could practice like centuries old, time immemorial practices of agriculture. And taking a look at it from the river, you have fields that are flooded every year by the Thames River. So you have incredible nutrient value that floods over those flat areas. And so for the Munsee people, stopping here on the Thames River made a whole lot more sense than, let's say, coming up to Barrie, Ontario, where the rivers don't necessarily have that same floodplain. So they were able to practice their agriculture much as they had back in New York and New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and here in southwestern Ontario. The other part of the river now talks about politics and treaties. So Governor Simcoe came through. He did give the Munsees a belt that promised that if they would stay with the British throughout the next couple of years, the next couple of decades, that they would get their land of 12 Mile Square. This is a belt that actually came from our community, and because it is a reversal color, as far as I understand, this is a warning belt because it has purple wampum beads instead of white as a background. But this is a copy of the belt that was given to our people by William Penn back in the 1650s in Pennsylvania. So this is what was called the Friendship Belt, and it sort of signifies what was to be a good time for the Delaware people, the Lenape people in Pennsylvania, where they were going to live in peace with the colony of Pennsylvania. And of course, when William Penn went back to England, his relatives took over, and of course, then things just decidedly went sideways in terms of shady deals, such as the walking purchase, and we had to leave Pennsylvania. But this is one of the belts that was a copy made in our community to remember that treaty and the broken treaty that it was, and it resides in the Royal Ontario Museum at this point. The GT belt or the GJ belt, George Johnson was a British officer in Upper New York State in about the 1760s, 1750s. And this belt was a land agreement in Upper New York State between the Munsees and the British Crown. So we have a couple of belts here that signify broken agreements between us and the British Crown for land, for protection, for an agreement. And of course, this is all part of traveling down this river, right? You have this sudden idea of Governor Simcoe gave a belt, but were there other wampum belts that were associated with our community? So it's like that. It's like that lighting the fire. It's like that movie that Nicolas Cage starred in. I think it was American Treasure. I can't remember. But you're always on to the next hunt in terms of finding something that's associated with Munsee, Delaware that could be helpful. Some additional photos. This is south of, I'm going to say it's south of Dutton. But you'll notice that the topography changes. So gone are the flat beds beside the river where cornfields can grow. And now you've got these really tall clay cliffs. And of course, you got the swallows that are nesting into the holes along the river. But you also come into face to face with different plants and different species than you did when you were up in London. And when you travel just south of Springbank over the river, you actually cross a really rocky patch. It's got some white water, the Thames River, and I never knew that. But when the south side or the southern part after Dutton, it becomes really slow and meandering, and you've got these really high cliffs. And one thing that really amazed me was that just by taking a paddle, I would have thought that I was in Northern Ontario, right, or away from civilization completely, because you can get that. Just throwing your canoe in the river and going for a paddle, you really can feel isolated in some places.
Ian, can you restart the slideshow? We're seeing your whole screen and not just the slides at the moment.
Oh, is that right? Oh, thank you very much for telling me.
No problem.
I'm going to stop it. I'll do it again here.
But either we're still seeing your whole.
Yeah, I know. I'll figure that out here. 1 second. I'll stop sharing again. So there we go. See, was that video? Should never have played the video.
It happens. It happens to all
Yeah,
of us.
that's right. I apologize for
I
those
can
who
edit
are.
some of that out. It's easy enough.
Yeah, that's right. Exit out here. Good for me to know, though. I'll get tricky again.
Fair enough.
Right. All right, let's try this again. And I'll try and get us to the appropriate slide here.
Perfect.
We'll go slow here and won't make anybody dizzy. There we go. I think that was the slide that we were at with the high banks. This part of the river sort of caused me to think in terms of river journeys between the two communities, because I'm actually traveling between Munsee-Delaware and Moraviantown. And because we're both Munsee speaking communities and people that have a shared history, we also have a shared religion. People from Moraviantown used to come up to Munsee to access the old religion of the Munsee people. Moraviantown had been Christianized and was a Christian community. However, people still wanted to access those old ways of doing things. So there was lots of travel between the two communities. We shared corn with them to make sure that their community survived in 1792 when they established on the Thames. And lots of relatives came up from Moraviantown to come to Munsee to practice the old religion. So this sort of spurned a thought in terms of we have a very specific religion amongst the Munsee people. It's known as the Big House religion. And the two communities, the one at Grand River and one at Munsee, had a big house. The one at Grand River lasted a little longer than ours, but they were both sort of ceased practice in the 1840s. But we wanted to learn more about, well, what sort of exists in terms of museums and archives that have some of our connections to our big house. We have community members who can tell us where the big house was in our community, but there's nothing there as made out of wood. And as this picture shows, the roof had been taken off in 1850 and had probably ceased to exist by 1860. However, there's lots of things around the world that are associated with not only this building, but there would have actually been a subsequent building close by that would have been part of our Mask Society. So much like the Haudenosaunee that have the Hadui, the False Face Society, the Munsee people also had a Mask Society that would have had a building close by. So this past year, I've had the opportunity to go to Scotland, to Germany, to New York City, to visit with museums that have some of our masks and our items of spiritual knowledge. So these ancestors are very helpful because they actually teach not only the language, but they also teach cultural practice. They share this knowledge with the people who've come for a visit. These pictures are drawings from Peter Jones, the Reverend Peter Jones from Mississaugas of the Credit. He was also the person that collected these masks and the doll after people converted to Methodism. So this is these are his drawings. We have found the two of these items here, and those are going to be shared with community members to sort of get a better understanding of what relationship needs to happen between our community and our ancestor items that are located around the world. And we just keep getting higher banks. So this is closer now down to towards Moravian Town, but you're kind of out of luck if you have to scale that cliff. And there's lots of swallows on that side, and the river is really slow. But again, you get that sense that you're in a different part of the world other than southwestern Ontario, right? Because you can't see the cornfields that are probably up above. But this river's got a whole lot of surprises to it in terms of its views. Now, one of my favorite things is working with the language, and one of the sitting in the bow of the canoe, I'm busily taking notes or taking pictures that I can come back to. So what I thought I'd offer here is some of the trees that are located along the Thames River and that we've got some translations for. So this piece here, the white cedar, Shindak, is one of the four medicines that Munsee people use. Of course, there's been lots made out of that you can make cedar tea, get your vitamin C. There's another tree that's located here too that's called, it's the sycamore. And I was amazed that there's huge sycamores down in New Jersey and Pennsylvania and New York. There's no sycamores in Barrie, Ontario, unless they've been specimen planted. But along the Thames River, they're huge, right? Because, of course, the temperate climate. So if I'm a Munsee person who's paddling the Thames River in 1785, I'd be incredibly, not shocked perhaps, but I'd be incredibly happy to see that there's a resource that I had back in New Jersey here on the Thames River. And if you break down the word for sycamore, in the language, it means, in the language, it says Amaholawak. And Amahol in Munsee language means boat. So it's a boat tree. So we know what the sycamore tree was actually used for by the Munsee people, right? We didn't have access to as much birch and poplar down in New York State and Pennsylvania. So we made dugouts out of the sycamore trees and yellow poplars and things like that. So coming to settle on the Thames River made sense because you were actually surrounded by a climate and an ecosystem that is similar to what you may have found back in New York and in Pennsylvania. And to highlight this, I apologize. My younger self would have kicked myself in the butt. But I think that's what happens when you get older. You become a plant geek or a bird geek or whatever. I've become both. Maybe it's just you're slowing down and you're taking notice of what's around you. But in May, I was helping out Western with some students from the three communities on the Thames, and I found this tree. Well, maybe the tree found me. That's at the edge of our parking lot at our community center. And for those on the call, you might recognize it as the redbud. Well, redbuds aren't supposed to grow here. And our reserve is not necessarily, it's not like a cultivated tree. This is in the middle of a bush, right opposite our community center. It's not something that somebody planted. Just taking a tour out of the road towards Middlemiss, there's a bunch of other redbuds that are growing along the road. And I had to share it with all the kids, and I was like, oh, they're just going to think I'm a geek or an old timer, and they're just going to shut me down. And then everybody had to go and take a look. And I said, you know what, Munsee people use this as a medicine, right? This is a medicine tree that we had back in Pennsylvania and New Jersey and New York. And lo and behold, this tree is here in southwestern Ontario now. There have been recordings that it was in Leamington and Point Pelee back in the 1850s, but that was like the extreme edge of its range. So one could argue that, with climate change and whatnot, that the redbud's actually able to survive, up closer towards London. But here's a direct connection to an ancestor, a plant, a medicine that that's growing on Munsee now that wouldn't have grown, 10, 15 years ago. Making those connections again to medicinal. So the Reverend Alan Salt was a minister on our reserve, and he recorded a concoction, Mother's Black Salve. in English through an interview with a person from Munsee. Unfortunately, doesn't record her name, which is a shame, but he does record that you have to find different ingredients in different places. And in this, he records that you have to get some material in Lake St. Clair. So Lake St. Clair is not an easy journey from Munsee. It's going to take you some time, but it does highlight the fact that you're just not going to be able to get this at Walmart, or you're not going to get it at No Frills, that you actually have to put some effort into it to find the medicines you need to support the healthcare of the community. And it comes back to that Thames River being so important to be able to find those, or to be able actually to go and get them. There's the old railway bridge. That was the one that goes through Middlemiss, or used to go through Middlemiss, I think, on the way to Sarnia. I'm going to be embarrassed and not know what railway that was. And I'm sure my ancestors who worked on the railway are not thrilled with me now, but it is a very impressive bridge. To the left of it, there is an ecosystem that is, it's like a prairie ecosystem. It has some very rare plants that we're looking at. Some that are they're very rare to southwestern Ontario. They're managed by the Talbot Trust. But again, all along here we had eagles. There's eagles nesting along the river, and they're following us along the river as we're paddling. There's some of the yearly activities, that seasonal activities I was talking about, that those three communities on the Thames weren't necessarily all where we stayed. So we had deer fences in southwestern Ontario that extended from either side of the Thames River and went for miles. And we had fish weirs in the Thames River. So that'd be sort of V-shaped rock patterns. Mark Peters had some aerial photos of the Thames River. He sort of pointed out where he thought some of those fish weirs would be. Maple sugar may have happened in our community, but the Moravians do talk about coming to visit, and that the main villages were nobody was there, but they actually were at the maple sugar camps. So I'm not exactly sure where those were in relation to our community, but there's more things to find out. The picture of the maple syrup, I still make maple syrup. My great grandfather taught my father, and I picked it up during the pandemic, so I do make it. I don't make it over wood fire because, of course, I live next to neighbors who may not want to get smoked out. So I do try and use some of the old ways, but even practicing one of the traditional ways of the Munsee people in terms of getting maple sugar leads you to all this information in terms of ceremony. It talks about how they used it as trade at Detroit in order to get things that they needed. And then they also talk about the fact that the Moravian missionaries didn't necessarily want Munsee people and Moravian people mixing together because they might be a bad influence. But you get all of this social nuance from paddling the river and then going ahead and then practicing something that Munsee people have done for centuries. Fish are important, so we have for language use within our schools, within our daycares, but also our language classes. People are now able to access the species of the fish in the river. And there's a picture of the river again. This is getting closer to Delaware, and it kind of was taken at this time where you got that really nice stretch of September, October weather, where it was 25 degrees and hot. You can throw the canoe in the river and go for a paddle. So from an archaeological standpoint, I didn't share anything archaeological at all, but I will maybe share the only built object that I can. This is the Logan Dolson House, which is in Longwoods Conservation Area. This building was donated by Bill Dolson when Longwoods was created back in the early 1970s. So the story within our family is that the building was actually given to the Dolson family when there was a connection between the two families. We lived next door to each other. Next door being that their property was on the other side of the road from the Logans. And so this cabin is actually a connection to, I would argue, back to at least the 1840s. It's the only built structure that is that old from our community. This building is also very important for my family for a reason that in the very early to late 1840s, there was a story told. And of course, the eighth wonder of the world, for Southwestern Ontario at least, is where is Tecumseh buried? Or at least that was a story that was always a huge topic for me when I was younger. It was a story that I asked my great grandfather, hey, do you know where he'd always say, I know where Tecumseh's buried. And he said, oh, well, where? It'd be wonderful. You know, the great chief who passed away in 1813. And he said, oh, I can't tell you. I said, well, thanks. But my great great uncle Jacob told the London Free Press about Tecumseh. He told him about the how he was visited, his family was visited by one of the veterans of 1812. They talked about, they shared Tecumseh's last couple of evenings on the Thames River. And they related that Jacob was a very young person at the time. He was supposed to be going to bed up in the rafters of that building that you see there. But he overheard it and he told the story many years later to the London Free Press in the 1920s, 1930s, but he wouldn't tell them where he was buried. So he stopped short. He gave a good story, but he would never give up the secret. So what has happened now is that we've taken a story that was actually told by a man who was a Munsee speaker first and an English speaker second. And what we've done is we've translated it back into the Munsee language for use in our community so people can learn the Munsee language. So it's that translation of story from something that has happened in our community, from, I guess, an archaeological perspective, that now benefits people in the modern day. And there's another picture of the river. Looking as clay as it is, we're getting close to Delaware too. I can tell by the bank there on the side to the left, it's pretty flat. And again, we sort of look at people from the community, and I start from family members in this November. Will be the launch of a story that highlights one of our veterans that came from our community named Arnold Logan, who is my great great uncle. He fought in World War I and was one of the very first Indigenous soldiers to die in that war. So he has a statue that is built for him out on the reserve that's on top of a tombstone. Those statues are very similar to ones that are found in sort of township and county memorials across the province. But he has his own separate one, which was given to the family by the Brotherhood of Firemen and Engineers from St. Thomas. So there's a lot of story there where you have a young man who's connected to both the community, but he's also connected to the city of St. Thomas. So this fall, this November, will be the release of the story of Arnold Logan, but plans are still in the works for that one as I try and squeeze that around my full-time job. And there's the beautiful clay banks. We saw a lot of clay banks, but those are the clay banks that are that's the Oneida Nation of the Thames. If you were to scale the top and then walk through the trees, but again, it really does sort of highlight the misconceptions you can have of the Thames River. You just think it's flat. It's going through flat southern Ontario, but you would never expect to see the topography and the changes of the sides of the river, of the trees, of the plants. And, it's a well-worthy journey. If you have the opportunity to even paddle a little bit, I would definitely recommend it. And I think, oh, no, it's not my last slide. That's the river down by Moraviantown. So we switched from Munsee to Moraviantown. This is just at Big Bend, I believe is what you call it. It is a Big Bend. If you have to go around it, you'll know that it's a long way. And Indigenous people actually portaged through the Big Bend. They didn't actually go all the way around. They actually portaged across it. So we took the long way and figured it out. So that's sort of where Tom, my sister Mary Jane, and I are at right now. Hopefully, we get to put the canoes back in the river in the upcoming year, 2026. Hopefully, there's the opportunity to do that. And I think that's it. I'll stop sharing, and then if there's any questions, I'm more than happy to answer any comments.